Duncan MacLeod of the Clan MacLeod. Do you remember that? What was he called? God, he's the guy that lived forever. He was the immortal. I can't remember. That hottie in Scotland.
Macintosh is part of my bloodline, is the Macintosh line.
Are you in a kilt tonight?
Funnily enough, not. It's a little nippy for that.
A little nippy or a little nippy?
Both.
Hello, Duncan Butchart. Welcome to Life in a Garden Online. It's fabulous to have you here. I'm so glad that I actually managed to talk you into this.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you. It's nice to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. Why did I have to work so hard to get you here?
I don't know that you really did. I mean, I'm not very big on self-promotion, and that's always been a tense sort of part of what I have to do. I'm not big on that. I'm more of a backroom
artist. You need to get big on that. It's something that you need to push.
I know, but it's contrary to a lot of my own instincts, which is the sort of more on the hermit side.
You can't do that. That's not allowed. Artists need to be larger than life and go out there and sell themselves and prostitute themselves to the world and make money.
You know what well, yeah, I guess for me it's uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable doing that, and I don't know how to get over it. It's just one of those things.
Okay, well, that's fair enough. Duncan, where do you hail from?
Okay, so I was born in the UK, in England, in a place called Little Chalfont, which is a small town in Buckinghamshire.
Sounds very French.
Well, the name Butchart, as opposed to Bouchard, which is a softer ending with a D, we've got a T on the end of our name, actually seems to be some kind of French, Scottish kind of thing. So both my parents were born in Dundee in Scotland, and so therefore that makes me 100% Scottish. But I only went once to Scotland to see a dying grandmother, and that was one of these overnight sort of train in a blizzard sort of weekends, which I have very little recollection of. And I'm desperate to get back to Scotland because that's where my roots are. Both of my parents are many generations back Scottish. My father, Joe Butchart, fought in the Second World War, and he would have been 100 years old had he been still alive on the 5th of August.
Oh, wow. That's quite an innings. How long has he been gone?
Well, he's been gone about 15 years now.
It's almost the same as mine.
My mum was on the Macintosh side, and so there's a much more authentic Scottish kind of lineage that can be traced on her side. Somewhere the Butcharts were caught up with the French. I'm not sure quite how that all played out, but anyway, that's my sort of heritage.
Nice. It's a nice heritage. It's nice to have ancestral heritage. My dad also fought in the Second World War, but he was a South African. So 8th Infantry under Montgomery in the desert.
Right. Yeah. So that's funny enough where my dad ended up too. He was part of the desert forces fighting against Rommel, and he's written his own little book which hasn't been published, but tells us what he did in the war and exactly where he ended up. And he spent most of his time in North Africa and in Italy, in fact.
That's fantastic. My dad refused to. He wouldn't even talk about the war. The only thing he used to say is, we would have had steak and eggs if we'd had eggs, we'd have had steak and eggs if we'd had steak. I mean, that was like the limit of. He would not talk about the war. In fact, my mother and I found this little 5-year diary that he had taken through the war with him, and there were like just some little annotations about when he met his first wife, and because they married quite young. And also like the Battle of Guardia and things like that were written in the book, those dates, or so-and-so got lost today. But we were giggling over the entries about his future wife. and he stole the book, and we never saw it again. I think he threw it away, he destroyed it. So that was really sad, and otherwise he wouldn't talk about it, so all that history has been lost. But this is not about me, this is about you.
Yeah, I think that's why they call it the silent generation, isn't it? Because it had such a massive impact, and I'm one of what are known as the baby boomers.
When were you born?
58.
Okay.
Yeah, so we were out there populating, you know, our parents were populating the world, and I was one of the sort of offspring of that. So yeah, I'm keen to get back to Scotland one day and sort of get to grips more with my ancestry, I think.
Yeah, it's always fantastic to do that and see where you come from and explore.
Yeah.
You never know, you might go through the stones and wake up in the 16th century.
For sure.
Duncan, have you always been interested in art? Have you always been an artist?
Yeah, it's always been part of what I've been about, and I've had this kind of strange combination, I think, of sitting kind of midway between art and science, because I've always wanted to express myself through art, but I've at the same time had a very deep interest in natural history and biology, and have wanted to really understand that more. So I feel my life has been kind of split between those two interests, and I've always been trying to find a way to bring those two together through my work. And actually, to some extent, I think I've enabled that to happen. Quite often, it's been by chance or accident, but somehow it seems to have happened. And what we're here to talk about tonight, which is my poster art in particular, is really quite a neat coming together of the two disciplines of art and science, as I see it, you know, and the art for me, you know, as a kid, I was always picking up a pencil or a paintbrush or making something out of plasticine, and I've always just had a kind of inherent need to do that.
What is your work background?
So, coming from the background of my father, which we spoke about earlier on, he was quite keen to get me into the army as a young man, and tried everything that he could to get me to join the South African Defence Force. We emigrated to South Africa when I was 13 years old. The whole family moved from England to Johannesburg. And at that time in the history of this country, of course, there was a big push to get as many people into the national service as possible. And my father tried desperately to get me into the army. I wasn't that keen. Most people weren't. But I also had quite a liberal leaning as well at that time. So it didn't sit nicely with me to get into the military at all. And we had quite a tussle, me and my father, about what maybe I should be doing with my life. And my sort of need or interest to get into university and follow a scientific sort of career wasn't something he supported. He didn't really feel that was a great place for me. He was a much more inclined to think that it was better to just get the kid out of the house and learn the lessons of life the hard way. And so, having completed school, I really felt a need to study on my own. And so I found a course in wildlife management, a correspondence course, but I needed to find a way to pay for that. And so I got a job in a little bookshop in the center of Johannesburg. And that that also enveloped me in the world of books, which is something I've never left behind. And for a few years, I was selling books during the day, and I was studying wildlife management at night. And
That's hectic.
yeah, so the work in the book industry eventually became an interest in publishing, because I felt there was a possibility there to bring my artistic interests into books, and hopefully maybe get involved in the design and illustration of books. And so for about 4 or 5 years, that was the path that I was on. And that again didn't quite play out perhaps the way I would have hoped. And it forced me in 1985 to break away from the book business and go out on my own as an entrepreneur and as an illustrator and designer of publications. So for many years, that's what I've done. I've become a sort of a specialist in the field of natural history publications, and I have had a few books published commercially, particularly by Strake Nature. But most of my work has been through the tourism industry, where I have created bespoke tools and materials for guests who are wanting a nature experience in a particular place.
That sounds fascinating.
So I have got with me here tonight a number of visuals, which I think in a way will help to tell the story of what I'm doing and how I got there. But essentially, for the last sort of 30 or more years, I've been working in the field of nature tourism, and particularly interested in those projects that had a conservation angle. And more in recent times, ecotourism has been one of the real powerful tools for conservation itself, and the inflow of cash from tourists has enabled NGOs to enact species and habitat conservation programs which otherwise would not have happened. So my real motivation in life is actually to leave the planet in a way where I feel that I've made a contribution to safeguarding nature, and everything that I do is really to that end.
I think that's a magnificent goal in life, to be quite honest. That really is. Duncan, I looked on your website, you refer to yourself as an illustrator as opposed to an artist. Where do you see the difference?
Well, that's a contentious topic, and I think it's one that I personally have struggled with for most of my life, and I've wrestled with it and still am, I think. I've been fortunate to engage with a lot of people who I regard as pure artists, but at the same time, I've also met a lot of people who have that label, but whose work I don't believe measures up to that. I've always been, for myself, seen a major distinction between fine art and illustration is really the sense of representation. So if you're simply representing something that you see with your own eyes and putting that on paper, or making it out of clay or what have you, then I see that as representational art, and it's very functional. It can be an illustration for a book, or it can be a replica of something from nature. Whereas I, in my mind, regard fine art as something that goes beyond that, which actually takes the viewer to a place where they can derive their own meaning and thoughts from what they're looking at. And if you represent a cheetah in clay, exactly as what a cheetah looks like, there doesn't leave much room for the viewer to take anything more out of it. And the
Except
same,
to marvel at one's talent in recreating it.
yeah, there could be that. But whereas there'll be painters and sculptors who maybe leave enough out of what they're doing to give the viewer a chance to put their own interpretation in there. So I suppose in a nutshell, for me, that's what it's about.
Kind of like poetry, isn't it? It's open to interpretation.
I think it's open to interpretation, and I think that's what and also, you know, let's be honest, a lot of art, fine art, is created out of suffering. There's often a lot of meaning to it, in the sense of a message. Some message is being delivered, and I don't know that any of my work particularly does that. So that's why I prefer to see myself more as an illustrator than an artist.
I know that I will never be a particularly great artist because I'm not tortured enough. You know, that's my work is kind of like happy work. It's not tortured work at all.
Well, funny enough, that's something I get a lot from people, is they think my work is very happy. It makes them happy to look at it. And for me, that's fine. That's great.
I like your work. In fact, I love your work. I just love that. I love the stylized version. You know, I think that's amazing. Would you like to share your presentation with us, and then we'll talk about how you got into this? Well, I think that's coming from your presentation, and the way you work. I'd like to learn, you know, how you work.
Thanks, Mandy. I'll try and do that. So have you got anything there?
Yeah, the African Journey's up.
Okay, the African Journey collection. So this is what I've called my current project, which, as I'm working through it, I realize more and more that it's my own journey, actually, that I'm now putting on paper. So a lot of people, like my father, as I mentioned earlier, will write a autobiography, and I never thought that I'd ever have such a thing that would be interesting enough to do. But it turns out that with the art that I'm creating now, it is in a way an autobiography. So what I'm talking about here in particular are my travel themed posters. So where this began, let's have a look. Where this began is very, very interesting to me, because prior to the advent of photography, and of course magazines and television advertising, and these days internet advertising, prior to all of that, the only way to sell something was really through a poster. And the heyday of the travel poster was really between the 1920s and the 1950s. And at that time, a lot of experiences, particularly travel experiences, but also events such as circuses or concerts, were promoted through these beautifully designed large format posters. And some of you will be familiar with the British Railway posters and the airline posters from that time, which have now become very much in vogue, and the originals, which are very, very hard to find, you know, fetch enormous prices on auction. But enough of those originals survived, enough of them survived, that replicas have been made of many of the old posters from that era. And these are now very popular in decor all around the world. So there's a number of companies that actually produce replicas of those old posters, and I've got 3 of them on the screen here. And the circus posters are particularly lively and interesting. And many of these designs were actually, in the beginning, were produced by quite famous artists. The first posters in France for the Moulin Rouge were created by Toulouse-Lautrec, and Manet was involved in creating some posters as well.
I loved the Moulin Rouge posters. They were beautiful.
They're beautiful pieces of art, and they're now seen as the most collectible things. So I had this idea that when I looked at what had been done in the past, there seemed to be quite a big gap in terms of Africa. It seemed to have been left out from that whole genre of travel posters. The North American posters of the national parks in the USA, a beautiful collection of posters for all of the best known national parks in America. And I thought, well, that wasn't done back then for Africa, but how about if I try and do that now, but in such a way that it looks almost as if it came from back then. So I was bringing a sense of nostalgia and a sense of style to a range of posters which I thought would fit in with the true vintage posters, but at the same time still be distinctive as something that I had created. So that was my goal. That was the aim of my business. Here are some posters from that time. These are Art Deco style posters produced really to advertise destinations, and airlines would promote these wonderful places that you might travel to through very vibrant, beautiful poster designs. This really is commercial art. It's graphic art. It's art created with the express purpose of really getting a sale for a product. So what happened as this idea was germinating in my mind, I started harking back to this character Tintin, who'd been so much a boyhood hero for me. As a young kid growing up, I loved the Tintin adventures. They took me all over the world, and even to the moon, for those of you who are familiar with the Tintin stories. But at the same time, the artwork in those Tintin books, comic books, was absolutely superb, and was of such a high standard that Hergé, the creator of Tintin, is now recognized as one of the finest sort of ligne clair graphic artists of all time. And in fact, there's a museum featuring all of his art in Brussels. And that's an ambition of mine, is to get there and have a look.
And I think it just became an ambition of mine too.
So these are some of the titles you'll recognize if you're a fan of Tintin. As well as the books, you know, quite a lot of merchandise has been created over the years related to Tintin and Captain Haddock, and of course the little dog Snowy that accompanied him on all these adventures. So I thought, let me try and bring that style that I love so much and see if I can marry that with the tradition of vintage poster art. And so that's how it all began for me. And actually, probably about 10 years ago, I already started making little doodles like this, where I would scratch out ideas and concepts and little tonal drawings that would one day become more graphic pieces. And what's important when you look at what I do is it's not really only just an illustration of an elephant in the Chobe River or a whale in the water at Hermanus. It's very much, the focus for me is on composition and design. So I'm looking at it as a design piece. And I think overall that is the appeal of the vintage posters to modern decor, is that they're very much a piece of design as well as being an illustration. So it starts with these little ideas. Some of these ideas come to me you know, early in the morning. Others will come to me on the open road. Others will come to me when I'm going through my catalog or folders of photographs. So on the right-hand side here, you can see one of my existing posters. It's the Drakensberg, which I think probably as we're sitting here this evening, those mountains, that amphitheater behind there will be probably white with snow, I imagine. And probably the river, the Tugela River, will be iced up, seeing as how we're having such a cold spell. But my objective with each poster design that represents a particular place is to somehow capture the essence of that place at one shot. So you've got one view and you've got to somehow capture the essence. And that for me is a lovely challenge to have. So each one is based on my own experience of being in that place. And every poster that features in my range is of a place that I've actually been to and have come to know.
Do you take photographs, or how do you work from?
I take photographs as well as field sketches. So I love the idea of just taking small sketches in a notebook of particular things in particular places. And that becomes my resource material. So on the left-hand side, you can see some drawings of a bearded vulture. And that became the model for the bird in the sky, which is a simplified, stylized bearded vulture. Everything in my posters is really stripped of detail, and it's all flat color, which is the Hergé Tintin style. So if you want to see individual feathers and claws, then it's not for you. I'm looking at a very much more stylized, kind of fun approach in a way, but at the same time, very authentic in terms of the subject matter. So over here, you can see my contrasting illustration styles. I've done a lot of very detailed watercolor work, as you can see with the cheetahs on the top there. But what I'm again trying to do here is strip away that detail and make it simpler and more graphic in its representation. And very much always a focus on color, balance and harmony. So you might see here that the cheetah itself in the Masai Mara is a little darker than I've represented it in my watercolor illustration. But the reason for that is that I needed it to stand out from the grasslands behind. Here on the next slide.
Duncan, sorry to interrupt, but for me, the essence of an artist is one who captures something without the detail. Now, I couldn't do what you've done. You know, I can see it's a cheetah. I know it's a cheetah. It stands out as a cheetah. You've caught the essence of the cheetah, where I'm incapable of doing that in a graphic representation. So for me, that's a sign of a fabulous artist, never mind a graphic artist.
Well, it's taken about 40 years, but
oh well, practice makes perfect. What can I say?
So here's that scene that is depicted in the poster itself. So in southwestern Kenya, you have the Masai Mara, which is the northernmost segment of the Serengeti ecosystem, and running down the western border of the Mara is this escarpment of these beautiful hills called the Ilululu Escarpment, and that I chose to represent in the poster. If you flip back, you can quickly see there the hills in that scene behind the cheetah. So if we go through some other designs, this will be a place which a number of people will be familiar with. It's not that far from South Africa. These are the famous dunes at Sossusvlei in central Namibia on the edge of the Namib Desert. It's a truly magnificent and awe-inspiring sand dune, and you can see the scale of it from the size of those trees at the bottom, which are camel thorn trees, which are about the size of a very big weeping willow tree. So for those of you in Johannesburg, you'll be able to refer to it in that regard, and that landscape with that beautiful rust red sand and blue winter sky is represented there. And in each poster design, I always put in particular animals that are very specific to that place. So of course, in the Namib, there was only one animal that I wanted there, and that was the gemsbok. It's the oryx. It's an animal which is super adapted to arid conditions. And then up above in the sky, another of my motifs for every design is to always feature a bird. And so up in the sky flying through are a couple of Namakwa sand grouse, or if there are any Afrikaans speaking people watching tonight, this little bird is known as the kalkievein, which is a lovely name because it's simply a referral to the call of the sand grouse. Kalkievein, they call as they fly across the arid landscape. So each design very much focuses on those key elements that are very typical of that place. So this was quite a tricky one. I lived in Nelspruit for 20 years on the edge of the Kruger National Park, and I used to go there very often, mostly on short day trips in and out. And of course, I needed a Kruger design for my poster. And the one thing, the two things about Kruger that really hit home to me when I was thinking about that, and the one is that you always experience Kruger from within a vehicle on a road. So I had to somehow represent that. This is not a place where you can walk around. It's a road experience. And so the poster needed to reflect that. So I wanted a road to be my main composition feature. At the same time, whenever you drive around in the Kruger, as I do, to watch birds or look at a dung beetle, if you stop in any place for too long, you'll have a bunch of people wanting to know where the lion is that you've just spotted. Vasti Leo. Okay. So, of course, I had to feature a lion in the Kruger poster, and I thought, let's have a couple of lions walking down the road. So here you can see how that design evolved. I chose Pretoria scop. I love those granite outcrops. I wanted a lilac-breasted roller in the picture. So there it is. That's the iconic Kruger bird. And just some lovely warm colors. The trees in that area are the silver terminalia. And there you can see a big silver terminalia tree on the right-hand side. So it's all about compositional harmony, but at the same time, as I mentioned, it's got to really capture the essence of the experience, not just the place, but the experience that you would have if you yourself went there.
And clearly a lot of thought.
Yeah, there's a lot of thought that goes into it. And that for me is like what I love about the project is it's very, very challenging. And it forces me to sort of engage in my memories and in my imagination and creativity. So this is a very interesting one. I'm living in Hermanus, so in a sense, we're at the beginning of the garden route. The garden route is technically that strip of road between Mossel Bay and Jeffreys Bay. That's how they define the garden route. So I thought, well, I better go on a road trip myself and actually, drive up and down this road and see if I can get some inspiration for my design for the garden route. After all, it's one of our most treasured South African road experiences, but it's also a very popular experience for international travelers who self-drive the garden route from Cape Town. And this is on the left, you'll see there's a photograph of the road close to the toll gate at Storms River Bridge. And that huge, magnificent tree on the left is a yellowwood tree, which is part of the Tsitsikamma forest, of course. So I thought, well, I've got to bring this to life. I can't just have that. I've got to bring something into it. So I thought, well, let's put a car on the road, but let's put a retro car on the road, since these are sort of retro posters. So I thought, well, a combi is a great road vehicle. I had a combi myself. In fact, it was my very first car that I ever owned was a combi, a VW combi. And I think I paid 900 Rand for it in 1981 or something. And so I thought, well, I'll put my combi on the road. But my combi was grey. It was a sort of a kind of a dead grey colour. So I didn't really want to use that. So I thought, well, how about a yellow combi? And in these pictures, you can see my grey combi, the real one, and the artwork of it. And then I thought, well, you know, I would love that movie, Little Miss Sunshine. I don't know how many people have seen
I loved that. It was fabulous.
About a dysfunctional family. So I thought, well, I'll use that as my combi. So we've got a kind of a combination there of a little bit of history of mine, but with a kind of a humorous twist. So
the previous poster makes me want to break out into song about, "Ach, please, Daddy, won't you take us to the drive-in?" There's just something about it that makes me like, you know, think of that song.
Yeah, thank you. And then, of course, again, a bird. In this case, it's the Knysna luri, or the Knysna turako, as we now call it. This whole place being very close to the little town of Knysna. So here's another part of my own personal history regarding the evolution of the poster designs. Ngorongoro is in Tanzania. It's an extinct volcano. It's on the eastern edge of the Serengeti ecosystem and is often referred to as one of the great wonders of the world. And it's extraordinary in the sense that you have a volcanic crater with very steep edges, and in that crater, nevertheless, are almost all of Africa's major mammal species. Enormous elephants, big herds of buffalo, lions, spotted hyenas, black rhinoceros, zebras, wildebeest. Everything you can imagine about Africa is somehow distilled in this little crater, which is only 20 kilometers across. So the Ngorongoro crater is very much a bucket list dream destination for most people, and something that's an expensive destination to get to. And, you know, for a lot of us, probably a place we may never get to be honest. But luckily for me, my work in ecotourism opened an opportunity for me to get not only to Ngorongoro, but to other parts of Tanzania on a regular basis. And I was working for a fantastic company now known as And Beyond, one of the world's finest safari destination outfitters. And my role within that group was to stimulate and promote the guides, the safari guides, those men and women who take guests on safari. My role was to actually get them engaged in field observation projects where they would document very carefully what they were seeing in nature. And it was an 8-year project, and it culminated in a series of journals where the observations and the field projects of these Tanzanian guides, as well as Kenyan, Zimbabwean, Namibian guides, and South African guides, were all put together in these books that were then made available to academic institutions, universities and museums all around the world. And what is interesting for me about this project is that the guides themselves were living in these natural landscapes. They were seeing animal behavior, and they were seeing seasonal changes in landscapes that scientists and ecologists were often missing because they weren't there for that long of a time. Most ecologists and scientists visit reserves and places on a sporadic basis, and they don't get to know individual animals, and they don't get to know seasonal changes to the same extent as the actual guides who live there. for 12 months of the year. So it was a fantastic way to both upskill and motivate the field teams and there were overall about 250 guides ultimately, and to motivate them and coach them in field observation and field documentation, and at the same time enrich indirectly the experience that the guests were then having with those guides. So this particular poster design means a lot to me because it reflects on the privilege that I had to work with those incredible people in Tanzania. And that view depicted in the poster is a view that you can actually get from the bathtub of the Ngorongoro Crater Lodge. And that's why I've put the picture of the bathtub in there, if you can see it, hopefully. And you're looking out onto what surely is one of the finest views on planet Earth.
Yeah, it's a terrible view, actually. Terrible. Last week, in fact, Women's Day, we were chatting to Nikki Fitzgerald, who's one of the owners of Angamara in Kenya, on the Masai Mara, just on the ridge there. And I made the mistake of saying to her, what would it cost to come and stay, at your lodge? And it was like $2,000 a night. So yes, we aren't going to get there anytime soon, if at all.
Yeah. It is quite a shame, but the one consolation, and Nikki's a good friend of mine. I've done various projects and worked on various projects with her. The one consolation is that we may not get ourselves to a lot of these luxury destinations or luxury lodges, but many of the destinations are nevertheless still open for travelers on a cheaper basis. But I think the big thing is that the responsible companies like And Beyond, Angama, Mara, they're putting so much back into those landscapes and into the people who ultimately are responsible for those landscapes. So, the mantra of And Beyond is really travel with a purpose, and make sure that if you have got all this money and you can afford to visit these incredible places on our planet, then do it in such a way that that money is going to filter down and benefit the wildlife and the people on the ground. So that's the consolation you can take out of it.
Thank you so much for that.
I hope it makes you feel better. This place is a lot closer to you, Mandi. Yeah, this place is closer to you. You can go there tomorrow or on the weekend if you like. That's the Magaliesberg. And after I left school and I was a struggling kind of bookshop worker come correspondence student, I got involved with a marvelous bunch of people who are running a thing called the Vulture Study Group. At that time, the main objective of the Vulture Group was to find ways to prevent the decline of this bird that features on my Magaliesberg poster. And that bird, of course, is the Cape vulture. It's a more or less endemic vulture species in South Africa. It does occur in very small numbers in the sub-region, but I think all the breeding colonies now are either in South Africa or in Lesotho. It's a very big scavenging vulture. It's a harmless bird. It's a very, very useful bird. And on the wing, it's an incredibly beautiful bird. Even in the hand, it's a beautiful bird. I used to have, or used to have a opportunity to move on fundraising drives move around with a live captive Cape vulture. And when you look into those beautiful golden yellow eyes of a Cape vulture, you'll see real beauty there. They have a very bad reputation, but for about 10 or 12 years, I was part of this group of enthusiastic, dynamic, young people who were committed to making life better for vultures. And the Magaliesberg today is still a breeding refuge for the Cape vulture, and so that's why he is depicted on this Magaliesberg design. That photograph at the bottom, oddly enough, if you can see it there, is my combi again, but this time covered with a Hessian kilt, you might say, or a
Is that the Macintosh Titan?
yeah, it's like a raincoat or something, but it's basically a Hessian hide. And what I would do with my combi is I would drive into particular areas where vultures might be found, and I would sit in that combi hide for most of the day with my camera and my notebook and record observations of the vultures, in particular making note of vultures which we had marked at their breeding sites on the colony. So there's another link to the combi there. So I made a lot of great friends during that time, and it was a very good foundation point for me as a young person to be so involved with vultures. And so that poster again is an autobiographical tribute and thank you to the vulture story. Currently, I'm living in Hermanus, as you would have heard at the beginning of the presentation. And Hermanus is a little way west of Cape Town. It's deep in the fold of False Bay, and it's very well known, and most well known, I suppose, now for the visitation of the southern right whales that move up from Antarctica at this particular time of year to calve and mate in the deep waters of Walker Bay. So in Hermanus, where we live, we can see, if we're lucky, these magnificent giant monster whales thrashing their tails around, suckling their babies, and every now and again breaching and splashing around within a very short distance of our beautiful rocky coast. And so, of course, I had to portray that in the Hermanus design. If you move a little inland, you get into the wheat fields and the canola fields of the Overberg. And this again is an interesting place in the sense that the blue crane, South Africa's national bird, has colonized the wheat fields of the Overberg. And there are more blue cranes here now than anywhere else in South Africa. And right now, at this time of year, in the end of winter, we're going hopefully into spring in the next few weeks. The fields of the Overberg are exactly as you see it in this poster, as incredible combination of emerald and lemon colors, and the mountains of the Rivier Sonderent behind. So these two designs are very much about where I live now. This is where I live right now. So another part of my life story, of course, has been my lovely wife, Tracy. She was for many years a teacher at Northcliffe High School in Johannesburg. And then together we moved to the Lowveld, where she taught at Penryn College, and then became a consultant to Uplands College. And we now live, as I say, in Hermanus, but our travels, as you know, as one does when I'd love to say this picture was taken last week, but I think it was a little earlier. But you know, the Kalahari, or the Kalahari as we call it now, is just one of those fabulous places that you can get to on your own. It's not expensive. And as we did, you can go there in a wreck of a vehicle and you can camp and you can have a marvelous time looking for gemsbok and oryx and honey badgers, or black korhans, as I've described in this design. So I think for many people, the Kalahari or the Kalahari is the ultimate self-adventure trip, and something that really is very doable for the majority of people, I think, with any means, and looking to do an interesting trip can get to the Kalahari. And so in that design, I've represented both it's a late sort of winter scene with the first storms of the year are rising up, but the grass is still that beautiful tawny blonde color, which I think is very evocative of the Kalahari. That sounded like a brown hyena barking in the background.
Yes, and now it's laughing at you. That's my child being naughty.
So I don't know if this is interesting enough, me just talking about the posters. Here's another couple of designs.
Before
Again,
you go
very
further, Duncan, can I just read some comments to you before you go any further?
cool. Yeah.
Going right back to the beginning of our conversation, Shamini says, I suppose there's a difference between craft and fine art. In the latter, the use value is irrelevant. Colleen says, I loved Tintin. My best memories were my dad taking me to the public library every Saturday morning to get my Tintin books. Shamini says, love the posters. I suppose there's a website to look at and perhaps purchase. There absolutely is. We'll get to that later. And then Colleen says, blue cranes are my favorite bird, and this talk is fascinating.
Okay, well, that's nice. That's good to hear. Shall I keep going?
Absolutely, Duncan.
Okay, all right. So again, these are two of the more distant destinations for South Africans, but not that far away. The Okavango Delta in Botswana, probably our greatest nearby wilderness area. I worked in the Okavango in two capacities. One as a young safari guide with the fledgling Wilderness Safaris Company, started by Colin Bell, a very good friend of mine, and more latterly as an author of a field guide to the Okavango Delta. In fact, now that I'm remembering it, I first went to the Okavango when I was still at school. We had a very ambitious geography master who felt that the wildlife club at Monduo High School, which is where I got my
You're from the
degree,
south, huh?
from the south,
Oi.
he felt that we needed to do a trip to the Okavango. That would be a great adventure for the wildlife club members in the school. And so he persuaded the headmaster to lend us or loan us the two combis. Here we are back talking about combis again, the VW combis. The school had two of them for sports events, and they would trek us back and forth to football games or tennis matches or what have you, athletics. So the geography master managed to get permission to take the two school combis on this adventure to the Okavango in Botswana. And I think there were about 12 of us, 12 kids, and then two couples who were, sharing the driving, two teacher couples who were sharing the driving. But anyway, a long story short, back then, the tar stopped at Tabazimbi. There were no tar roads in Botswana at all. And the road between, probably between about Palapi and Nata, was really brutal, corrugated calcrete, running through and past the Makharikari pans. And one of the combis lost its door, very, very much like a replay of the Little Miss Sunshine movie again. But the whole door fell off the combi, and a little while later, the gearbox seized up, and we ended up leaving that combi at the side of the road and squeezing into the remaining combi and managing to get to Nata. And at any rate, it was an enormous adventure, and a two-week excursion gave us actually only 3 days in the Okavango. We had so little time there because we had so many vehicle problems and other issues, getting stuck, begging for lifts, that we saw virtually no wildlife in the Delta. We only had a brief opportunity to get in and out of Moreni. We had to get a train back to Johannesburg, most of the group. And one of the combis, I think, is probably still there. It's probably a family of aardvark living in it now. So the Okavango, again, for me, is a very special place. It's a superbly pristine wilderness, and it's part of a much bigger and greater natural system. And there are a lot of effort now being made in Angola to safeguard the headwaters of the Okavango Delta, because the delta is fed by the rain that falls in the mountains of Angola. And should that be interfered with, the delta itself will dry up permanently and die. And so what's happened in the last 15, 20 years, there's been a more collaboration, more recognition that governments should work together, more recognition of the value that ecotourism can bring to economies. And so the wild areas that we have left in Africa, such as the Okavango, the Serengeti, and South Luangwa in Zambia, these places are going to become more and more valuable as mankind eats away at the planet. And the desire to recharge and get back to a pristine state is going to become something that more and more people are going to desire. And that's the way we can save it. We can save it through responsible tourism, in my opinion.
So what is your motivation for doing these posters?
My motivation is to celebrate the destinations and to actually bring them to the attention of people. Obviously, people are buying the poster art because it's nostalgic. It reminds them of a happy time they've had in a particular place. So it has got nostalgic value. But at the same time, I think my thought is that by bringing them all together in a similar style, whether it's Hermanus or it's South Luangwa or it's Ngorongoro, it's kind of bringing them together as a sort of in a sense of some unification or unity. And I think we need more of that on our planet. We need less division and we need more unity. So I think we've got to recognize we're all interconnected. All of these parks and people are interconnected. One of my big fascinations is bird migration. And, you know, bird migration tells us so much about how this planet works. I mean, in this poster here on South Luangwa, you can see the carmine bee-eaters, those magnificent pink bee-eaters that are flying around the elephant. What they're doing there, I've tried to represent, is they're picking up the grasshoppers that the elephant's disturbing in the grass. And so that's why these birds often are around big mammals. You see it in the Kruger, you'll find a drongo keeping company with a giraffe because there's always insects getting disturbed. But bird migration can tell us a lot about the planet and the state of the planet. And when we see declines in migratory birds in one place or another, it's a warning bell for us that something is not right in a particular place. We've seen, unfortunately, quite a sharp decline of shorebirds in the Cape over the last 10 years. These are birds that actually breed in Siberia and the Arctic Circle, and they migrate south and they feed on all the estuaries around southern and East Africa. And something is wrong. These birds, the numbers of these birds is dropping alarmingly. And so my interest in ornithology and with birds has helped me to understand and appreciate the role and the value that birds have in being communicators of the interconnectedness of our planet. A funny thing here in Hermanus, we have the barn swallows. The common European barn swallow is very abundant here in the summer months, as it is in Johannesburg and still luckily over much of South Africa. What I found out here in Hermanus is that the swallows at a certain time are feeding primarily on these tiny little flies that actually emerge from the kelp, which is the giant seaweed that gets washed out of the Atlantic Ocean onto our beaches here. And as the kelp is rotting, the flies lay their eggs in the kelp And then a new generation of flies emerges, and those are fed upon by the barn swallows, which then subsequently return to England or France to breed. And what that tells me is that the people that are looking at these swallows back in England or in France, they need to know that those swallows wouldn't be there if the kelp wasn't still washing up on our beaches in South Africa. So you can find similar examples all over the place. Let's have a look at what else we've got.
Duncan, why is there no Johannesburg poster?
Well, okay, I am thinking of that, and I very much feel it's a necessary addition that has to be made. It's just a matter of working out how to represent that. And I think your suggestion earlier is probably a really beautiful one to go with, and which is to somehow celebrate this wonderful regeneration that is going on in the wilds in Houghton, and how that green lung of Johannesburg has been reinvigorated. And maybe I need to see that as a way to introduce a Johannesburg poster into my range. I'd very much like to do that. I did live in Johannesburg for many years and have family and friends still living there. So I think it needs to be covered.
It does need to be covered. And I'm very much a Joburg girl, so I would love a Joburg poster.
Okay. So
but I mean,
I've got a list on my wall here of about 60 posters that I need still to do. So I'm going to elevate Johannesburg higher up that list.
Yeah, please. I don't want to wait till like number 61 or anything.
So these are other ones that, I mean, I've also been very fortunate again with my work in ecotourism as a consultant for tourism groups to get to some of the most, incredible places. And perhaps the most incredible place, and certainly the most valuable place for our own species, survival of human beings on planet Earth, is the Amazon rainforest. It is so critical and crucial to the climate that we depend upon, and to the stability of our biosphere, that we cannot, as a group of nations, we cannot allow this enormous, magnificent green rainforest basin to be damaged. Of course, it is happening. It's being eaten into at the edges. And, there are many groups fighting for the rainforest. It's been an ongoing thing for a long time. I'm hoping, as a lot of people probably might be, that this enormous fright that we've all been given with COVID-19 is going to maybe trigger something of a more responsible and more long-term outlook by politicians to our planet, and recognizing the extreme value of nature as the prerequisite for all life on Earth, and not only wildlife, but of course our own species. So the Amazon really represents that in a great way. And another interesting part of Brazil is the Pantanal, which is a wetland where the magnificent jaguar can be found. Let's have a look if we've got some more local designs.
Duncan, I want to ask you, what's your process? I mean, so you hand sketch little details, you work out what you want to put in the poster, and then do you paint it? Are these hand painted? What are they? Watercolors?
I started off hand painting them in acrylic. But what I found, well, actually I started off in oil. I started painting them in oil because I found that the color was more consistent. What happens with acrylic paint is that when it dries darker than when you put it on. So it's actually quite a difficult medium to use in that regard, whereas oil paint doesn't really change too much from the time you see it in the tube or mix it on your palette. It actually doesn't change too much. But the problem with oil paint is it's an incredibly time-consumptive process. And it's a very difficult process to actually correct. And whereas acrylic is a very opaque paint, and it's something that you can, first of all, it dries very, very quickly, and you can correct it very easily. But if you're having to mix a color to get a particular hue of green or a particular tone of blue, then it's very, very difficult to get that same color again. So I found so many obstacles with painting the designs that I eventually resorted to digital painting. And the way that I accomplished that was by taking the sketches and the, I don't know if you can be able to see any of this. I'm going to try and hold that up. If you can see, this is an acrylic painting of the Sossusvlei Dune. Can you see that?
Yep.
It's in the very tiny, in the corner there. But this is on a piece of sort of chipboard, hardwood. And so what I did is I photographed that, and then I scanned, I imported the photograph into Photoshop on my computer, and then I painted digitally onto my photograph, onto my painting, which had become a photograph, in order to smooth out the inconsistencies of color. The way Hergé himself would have worked with the Tintin cartoons is with ink. And so I ended up using Indian ink to actually encircle each object. And that gives it that sort of stylized look.
It's quite a process.
It's quite a process. And you know, the advantage with the digital painting is that you can actually change the colors very, very quickly. So if you want the sky a slightly different color of blue, you can do that. You can copy the file and you can change the color, and then you can revert back to your original one. When I do digital painting, as I call it, I use simply the mouse on my mouse pad. I don't use any of the painting tools that you can get on some of the digital painting programs. I don't employ any of the techniques like vignetting or auto shading or any of those computer tools. I simply move the mouse around on the image. And so as I've been doing that, it occurred to me something that I learned from Gregory Kerr, who I did classes with. He's a very well-known South African painter, fine art painter. And his definition really of painting and drawing is simply making marks. He considers it just mark making. So whether you're a San bushman who is chipping into the rock at Twyfelfontein, or you are a mosaic artist, or whatever you are, you're actually just making marks. You're actually scratching into a rock, or you're putting charcoal onto a piece of paper, or you're applying paint to a surface. It's the process of mark making. And so when I use my mouse on my screen, I feel it's the same thing. I feel like I'm just making marks.
It is the same thing.
So that's how I look at it. These are and incidentally, a lot of people have said to me when they look at this stuff, they say it looks like a woodcut, it looks like a lino cut or a silk screen. And it again, that pleases me, because that's the very look I was going for.
And your signature on your work, is it hand signature? Is it a digital signature? Each piece is signed before I send it off, so it's a pencil signature, an 8B pencil signature. But I do have a motif on each design. But each piece that I sell, I sign. Some editions, like the Overberg poster, that's actually a limited edition. There are only ever going to be 10 of the large format of that poster design. But others are not limited. And it will be in the future that I may do more limited editions of particular places for fundraising purposes, hopefully. I definitely think limited edition is the way to go, you know, or just a limited print run, even if it's just 50. I know that I bought in New Orleans, I bought a poster celebrating Mardi Gras, and I think that was one of about 350 or something. But I felt quite good because it was number whatever it was out of 350, and there weren't going to be any more after that.
Yeah, it certainly is. I do have limited edition prints on my website, but I had when I was conceptualizing this project as an actual online business, I did have discussions with a lot of people, and the feeling was that if I made it too limited, it would limit the number of people that might be able to get hold of them. So at the moment, because I'm doing all of the marketing and the sales and the distribution and even the packaging myself, it is effectively a limited edition. There are very limited numbers of many of them that have been sold and have gone out. And each one is printed individually by a fine art printer here in Hermanus. He uses archival liquid ink on a acid-free paper, so that the prints themselves, when I actually roll them and send them out and people see them, they're more beautiful than what you see on the screen, because of the quality of this guy's printing, and the paper is so good.
And Duncan, are you on your website? I noticed you have free downloads for coloring in. I loved that little concept of yours.
Yeah, that was what I thought I could maybe do at that lockdown, especially in that early lockdown phase. We were all really feeling the pinch in those first couple of weeks, and no one really knew where this was going. Little did we know we'd still be there 3 months later, but we've kind of all gotten used to it to some extent. But in those early weeks, I thought that might be a nice idea to simplify some of these designs, strip out all the color, and make them available as freebies for kids to color in at home. And I think also quite a few adults have enjoyed coloring them in. So those are still available off my website as free downloads. You can get an A4 version of each one as a freebie.
And what about, is there a COVID-19 one coming?
Well,
I think COVID art is very important.
I haven't myself got my head around that. It's not really a particular angle for me at the moment, but who knows? Who knows? I mean, I think one of the important things for me as someone who's so concerned with the natural world and the way we should be looking after it is how do we really help to change the mindset in China and in other parts of the world around these animal markets, live animal markets, and how do we facilitate a mindset change with that? I mean, it's been a struggle for decades with regards to rhinoceros horn, and now we're seeing the origins of viruses very much happening out of these markets. That's a very hot topic.
I think what you're seeing now is just the beginning, and it's the tip of the iceberg, quite frankly. I don't see this pandemic as being the end. I see it as being the beginning of a long stream of things that are just starting to roll into our lives. So this is not going away anytime soon, and we need to learn to live with the new normal, in inverted commas. And I think you're an optimist if you think that you're going to change the Chinese or their outlook. It saddens me, but people have very short memories.
Yeah. What encourages me is that Western people weren't operating that differently 200 years ago. And so there were meat markets in Western Europe where live animals were for sale at the side of the road. And you know, so there has been a shift and a change in Western culture. And I think it's possible. I think it is a difficult thing. But I think what we have to get out of this all, we have to get out of it that nature is not distinct from humanity. And what's gone wrong, I think, is that actual mindset of nature being separate from humankind. And You know, last couple of years ago, I wrote a book on garden birds in Southern Africa. And the theme of that book was really anti-gardening, in the sense that actually we've got to stop gardening. We've got to encourage biodiversity in these tiny spaces that we call our gardens in urban environments. We've got to encourage all life forms to carry on and do what they are meant to do, because that is going to give us stability in the biosphere of the planet Earth, you know.
Yeah.
So my philosophy is very much caught up in that. It is a rather optimistic one, and it's one that very much, for me personally, is hard and most difficult to stay on that horse, because I see too many obstacles and too much negativity around me, but I try to stay on the horse.
Duncan, I just want to read some more comments, and then I think we probably have to wrap it up because we've been going for quite a while.
You probably have.
Barbara commented, that sounds so typical of combis, but we're going back a while. Then Colleen says, and I think she's absolutely right, the representative for Joburg is the Hardy-Dar, spelled Hardy-Dar. Yes, that's not the spelling, but they've ruined every Teams meeting I've tried to have. The Hardy-Dar ibis needs recognition. Very much the Joburg bird these days. Anne says, very nice to meet you. Thank you for a really super talk, quite fascinating. Colleen said to everyone, kids. Oh, you're talking about my dog, Carl. Jackie, what a superbly fascinating evening. And Dave Pugh-Perry, brilliant and fascinating, thank you. And they are absolutely right. It's been wonderful to speak to you. I've said to you earlier, I absolutely love your work. And I definitely want a Joburg poster because I'm a Joburg girl. And I don't know, it'd be quite interesting to see what you eventually come up with and feature as Joburg, because I think our landmarks are more iconic than our wildlife. So jacaranda trees and hardy-dars.
I think Pretoria might get a bit angry if we put the jacaranda in for Johannesburg.
But we have an equal number, if not more, jacaranda trees than they do. Do you know that?
I can imagine sitting on the, sitting looking out there.
We also have the Saxonwald Shabeen, which is surrounded by jacaranda trees.
Look, I think there is room for a bit of humor. I mean, I'm certainly someone who survives on humor to a large extent. So perhaps I need to bring a little bit of a funny, humorous twist into some designs as well.
Yeah, and you definitely need that for Joburg, because we definitely need a sense of humor to live here. That's for sure. Duncan, if people who want to get in touch with you, I'll direct them to your website. I'll post that. It's duncanbutchart.com, is it not?
dbnatureworks.com.
Okay, I'm actually I think I have shared it on the group already, but I will share it again. Mariana said, thank you for sharing. Love your posters. Enjoy, Duncan. Thank you. It's been wonderful chatting to you. An average idea, what is an A1 cost, or an A2, A3?
Okay, so yeah, so the A3s, which are the smaller ones, which often people will buy a little set of and put up as 3 or 4 together. Those are 300 Rand each as a signed piece, as I say. And then twice that size, which is A2, is 600 Rand. And then the very large ones, the A1, which is what you might call traditional poster size, those are 900 Rand each. And then for the period of winter, let's see how long that lasts.
What, another 2 weeks?
I'm giving away with every order this poster, which is a map of Africa. It shows all the protected areas in Africa, and that's free with every order that you place for the foreseeable future, let's say.
And what size is that?
That's also A1. That's a very
large
A1
it's a big girl. Okay.
Poster, yeah.
Well, absolutely fabulous. I've loved it. I've loved chatting to you, and I think everybody else has thoroughly enjoyed this talk. It's been really wonderful and such an insight, and so nice to have gone on a personal journey with you, because all the posters are personally inspired. You need to add Sao Tome and Principe Island to your poster.
Great. Send the air ticket.
And I see there's like a decidedly sort of desert-like quality in North Africa.
Well,
dangerous area to travel in.
Well, yeah, look, I mean, there's not a lot happening there. It's the Sahara Desert. What I've tried to show on that map is really the areas that have been officially set aside. In other words, those are proclaimed areas. But of course, there's much of the Democratic Republic of Congo. There's much of Angola that is very, very wild. Most of Somalia, most of Mali, but none of it's officially protected. It's just sitting there waiting for something to happen.
I want to ask you, do you know David Fleminger?
The name sounds familiar, but I'm struggling to put a face there.
Okay, because we've had him to speak about 3 or 4 times on this format, and
Okay.
he's a great promoter of South Africa and doing self-drive tours and things, and he publishes little books. I'm going to put you in touch with him because I think your work and his work, you know, would work really nicely hand in
Maybe they
hand.
fit together.
Yeah.
Super. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
very much.
Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great evening, and I hope you'll join us tomorrow. We're talking to Catherine Matthews, who's in rescue work and in township rescue work, and she has a pet iguana named Goofy. So that should be a delightful chat. And then, of course, on Sunday morning, chatting to Tony Park about his new book, and that is about cycad conservation and safari adventure. Anyway, thank you, everybody. Have a fantastic evening. Duncan, it's been a pleasure. Go well, and see you guys tomorrow.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you.